And we're ready whenever you are, Mayor.
Thank you, Kathy. Good evening. Tonight, City Council is having 2025 budget workshop number 3, a focus on the water fund budget proposed, the proposed sewer fund budget, following which we'll have an overview of some of the key budget topics and discussion points that we've had over the workshops with the information presented by staff. And once we review that, then I will seek opinions from council as to, in advance of the public hearing and resolution at the November 12th meeting for adoption of a 2025 budget, to see if there's any suggested changes to what has been proposed and accepted. So with that, I will turn the discussion over to City Manager Fonda Cronis.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to council for rescheduling our power outage. Of course, it came back on not too long after we canceled the meeting, but I appreciate you accommodating us and coming in tonight to do that. A couple things. Number one is in front of you are a group of 4 handouts. The first 3 have already been distributed to you in the update from last week. It is fund balance projections through 2027 for all 3 operating funds. So you have an update for the general fund and then water and sewer as well. And just like I did before, I will give a brief overview of each of the 2 funds, water and sewer, that we're going to review today. I'll go over the fund balance projections through at least through 2025, and you can look at 2026 and 2027 on your own. They're all going to be based on decisions that we make this year and in subsequent years. And then we'll go page by page, and if you have any specific questions, we'll do our best to answer them. So I would ask that we move to tab 5 of your binder, and that is the water fund. Highlights from the water fund, as we've discussed previously, is a 4% rate increase, which off the flat fee is a $16 per year increase per household. And just to put that into a little bit of context, since 2022, costs in the water fund have increased $704,000, which is 39%. But the flat rate has only increased by 8.2%. This fund is in better shape than the general fund, and it is in significantly better shape than the sewer fund. But the caveat here is that we need to capital plan for significant improvements to the water treatment plant over the next several years to the tune of about $25 million. That's a rough number given to us in 2023 in a study that was done. That study is being updated now. But I think we can use $25 million as a rough estimate. So as the comptroller and I and Shane have discussed, a lot of that is going to have to be grant funded. Probably some of that will be low interest loans, but there's probably an assumption of some type of local share off of that $25 million. So just as we're doing some planning, we're thinking we probably are going to need to set aside $5 million in cash to be able to cover our local shares on some of these grants that come in. And that math is pretty simple. 20% of $25 million is $5 million. So that's where we get that number. It's certainly a guesstimate at this point, but important to understand why we probably want to entertain a small rate increase in this fund, not because we have costs incurred now, but for the future debt service costs or the capital costs that are coming to us sooner rather than later. So I think it's important for us to keep that in mind. Remember, water and sewer funds are what we call enterprise funds in the business, or business type funds. And what that means is we can't always run government like a business, but these are the operations where we can, right? You have customers, you charge customers, you have a set of expenses, and you need to cover your expenses with your revenues. Obviously, the rates that we charge are what our customers pay us. And because these are separate operations from the general fund and these are separate from each other, we're able to kind of pinpoint what that number is. And in any good business, what you do is you have to cover your costs and you need to cover your debt service if you have any. And then the other thing you have to think about is your future capital costs. And, a good successful business will blend all that together into a current rate based on capital improvement plans and those types of things. The only other thing I will note is that when we look on the revenue page in the water fund, so it'll be FX 2813, there's a phrase that's called appropriated fund balance. That is a misnomer description. What that description should be is more along the lines of, say, a release of funds from reserve. And you'll see this in both the water fund and the sewer fund, and they're both for $50,000, and that is each fund's portion for the purchase of the dump truck that we've been talking about over the course of our discussions. So,
Can I just ask a question?
of course.
Where's the FX? Where am I missing that?
Yeah,
So I'll get into the nitty gritty here. You'll see over here, your FX is your fund.
Okay.
No, all good. No, absolutely a good question to ask. So I will, before we get into the page by page, I'll call your attention to the fund balance projection for the water fund. And because of this format, and we've gone over it already, I'll go quicker than I did in the last meeting. 2022 and 2023 are your historical benchmarks for fund balance. And you can see in 2022, we had a $464,000 surplus in the fund, $272,000 roughly surplus in 2023. In 2024, the story is different. We'll have, as projected, about $190,000 in a deficit. And that will bring your fund balance down from the 3.2, almost $3.3 million at the beginning of this year, down to just under $3.1 million in 2024. If we turn the page.
Can we stay there for a second?
Of course, yep.
All right, so I'm looking at the 2024 revenue budget, and it shows transfer from fund balance help support current year of 91,000. So the estimated loss for this year is 190,000. Is there an explanation for the difference? We're expecting a $90,000 loss.
I will punt that over to Angela.
Yes, Mayor Tully, I was referencing the 91,000. Where is that coming from? Where are you referencing that from?
I'm looking at page 52 on the revenue sheet. 2024 total budget, account FX 2812, transfer from fund balance.
Okay.
91,000.
In looking at the expenditures when we carried them ahead, and that 190 was just an estimate from a little bit ago, there was some areas where we are not hitting the budget or we're over budget. One of them would be the unmetered, some of the revenue sale is not coming in where we thought it would. But the 190 probably needs an update, but there are certain areas where we're falling short on the revenue side.
So I guess to maybe more specifically answer your question, given that $91,000 appropriation from fund balance, we're expecting roughly a $100,000 deficit in addition to that, if that's any help. Did I say that right, Angela?
You did, yes, thank you. I was not articulate in my answer.
Part of that 91,000.
And I don't have the worksheet in front of me where we did the 190, so I'm just kind of quickly browsing through to see if I can specifically identify some instances, but on the fly I cannot, but I can certainly put that together.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real urgency to an answer tonight. It's just, I'm just noticing that difference, so.
Okay.
Prison on the meter side, kind of catching up for a second.
Ogdensburg.
Oxford and then United Health shut their facility down.
So that's the lack in projections for the water funding. All right.
Yeah, it is a revenue challenge.
Okay, that makes sense.
Any other questions on the
So it's
2020?
190 plus 90?
No, it'll be 190 all
190
in.
total, the 90,
Yep.
okay, all right, very good.
Yep. Anytime we appropriate fund balance, it basically says that we have more expenses in the budget than we have revenues coming in. And if everything comes into fruition, it goes from appropriated fund balance, you consider it the deficit. So our total deficit 190, we plan for 90. So we're projecting $100,000 more in deficit. All right, and turning the page, just looking at 2025. So we start with the fund balance of the 3.1-ish or so, predicting a very modest surplus of around $25,000. A new line here, as you can see just underneath that, the number is in red, transfer to fund balance. And then I referenced the line number there too. This is us taking revenue that comes in and earmarking it for fund balance to start saving up and building our fund balance amount to pay for some of our capital costs. So the plan in the budget this year is to take $154,615, set it aside, earmark it to go directly into fund balance. I suppose you can think about it as a surplus of revenues over expenses, but we're planning for it to, I think I lost the mic already, planning on it so that we can start doing our capital planning. It's nowhere near the $5 million we need, but to me, given the finances of the city, trying to do something is better than not doing anything at this point. And when we do that, we're also increasing some of our reserve and our repair reserve and our capital reserve a little bit to account for some other expenses that will come through. And that gives your unassigned fund balance $3.1 million out of the total fund balance of over $3.2 million. And as you can see, 2026 and 2027 are projections with modest surpluses for each day and an increase in the transfers to fund balance each of those years. All of that, however, is dependent on rate, right? What council decides to go with rate. So baked into this projection really is modest increases year over year on rate to be able to continue to put money into the fund balance to build that up to be able to pay the local share of capital costs. Obviously, these projections change depending on the final decision of council. And you can see we going for the end of 2025 of the $3.2 million to 3.4 and then almost 3.7 would be kind of the plan. And it doesn't get us the $5 million, but it again gets us a little closer to it. Given our financial challenges, something to me again is better than nothing. So I'll open the floor up to questions on the fund balance projection if anybody had one.
Well, you're projecting or proposing a 4% increase in water and sewer rates.
Yes, sir.
Looking at these numbers, I know it won't be very popular with citizens, but I'm wondering if maybe we ought to increase that by 0.25% or 0.5% to try to build for that 5 million we're going to need.
Above and beyond the 4%?
Yeah, maybe instead of 4%, maybe 4.25 or 4.5. In whichever fund,
Yeah.
maybe both funds, or if one fund's in worse shape than the other.
So we'll talk about the sewer fund in a little bit. The sewer fund is a different position. You've already expended the capital, and now the question is, how do you pay for the debt service? So that's okay. We've spent the money. Now we have to pay it back. So you're right. It's two sides of the same coin.
You said 4% would be about $25 a year.
It's $16 for the flat.
$15 for the flat rate. So even if we added another percent, that'd bring it up to about 20. I don't like that, and my citizens aren't going to like that, but I think looking at the financial picture, that might be a smart thing to do.
Well, That's the purview of council, and I'll do as council says. What we try to do is balance the increases, because we know anytime you have to pay more, it hurts, right? It comes right out of your pocket. What I would caution council is whatever decisions you make, next year, we're going to have the same conversation. We're probably going to need to increase rates to be able to, expenses are going to go up. We still need to make sure that we plan to put capital in. So just always look at this kind of as a longer term play on rate increases, not just once and then we forget about it for a few years, but incremental increases year over year to be able to continue to cover the cost of the fund, the business that it does, along with setting aside dollars. So the balance on what the right rate is councils. When we first did these funds, it was 12%, and we did our cutting and did what we could in the sewer fund appropriated fund balance to be able to get that down. We thought 4% was something that was reasonable. $16 a year we thought was reasonable to ask our residents to pay. But if council feels that the number needs to increase, we will obviously do that, and then whatever the additional surpluses is will go into fund balance.
So the proposed 4% increase is projected to provide the funds needed for the transfer to fund balance next year?
We believe that's the case. Yep. It all depends on what the
So
budget lines are.
And looking longer term and theoretically to try to maintaining, stable increases versus a knee-jerk increase, whatever. So in theory, you want to be looking at 4% again in 26 and 27.
We haven't gamed that out yet. We have some union contracts that are still up in the air that will affect these things. That's obviously on the cost side of it. But I think it's fair to say a number at this point of 3 to 5% over the course of several years is probably the right number, somewhere in there. We hope for 3, but it could be as much as 5.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'd like to stay at the 4%.
Yeah, and just for point of perspective, if we were to change the increase from 4% to 4.25, the overall complete total to come into the fund as an increase is less than $6,000. That's what the 0.25% is worth.
So saying that 4% to 5% generates an additional 24,000 in revenue.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think when I did it, it was 27, but close enough.
So 25. So.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions or comments with regards to the walkthrough on the fund balance? Okay.
All right, if we want to go page by page, we would start on what's called 52 of 74. That first page is revenues. The only thing I would point out, what I already discussed, the last revenue line there, the 2813, is labeled appropriated fund balance, but probably should say something more along the lines of release from reserve. And that's the $50,000 for the dump truck.
Okay, any questions on the revenue page?
All right. Next page is general insurance. I think we talked about that in the general fund. We allocated $65,000 to each of the 3. And next year we'll probably allocate an insurance increase for premium because we're going to have one this year. And we'll do it by the asset allocation as opposed to just a straight 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
We discussed that.
Next page we can skip. And then we get right into on page 55, water administration. The only thing I will point out on this page is line 590, contingency. Just like in the general fund, and you'll see it also in the sewer fund, I feel that it's an important thing to budget a contingency amount in the hopes we don't need it and it falls into surplus. But having dollars set aside for the what ifs of the 365 days, I think is really important. And because this fund is healthier than the others, we were able to get in $75,000 on that line. So that's what that line is for.
And the other thing to note, Fonda, if I may, when the budgets were done, we did not have we have 2 union contracts under negotiation. And so at this point in time, the wages from year over year, 24 to 25 budgets are equal. So when that gets settled and modified, we would have to modify that as well. And I would be the intention, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Foreman, but to take that out of fund balance, or not fund balance, but the contingency.
No, that's exactly the plan. Yep. So we do need dollars there.
Again, we've had discussion in the previous workshops on the value of contingency. I think we're all supportive of that budgeting concept. So,
The only other thing I would note is, which is good with the contingency they have in there, is we have nothing in engineering services. They're planning on bringing that preliminary engineering report back beginning of the year. I think we asked them to do it, an update for us.
Hey, I thought they were working on it now.
Yeah, they are working.
Yeah.
So if we're going to move forward with the project, we'll have to earmark money for that. Even to probably needs a little more work to get finalized to get out to look for grants.
questions or comments on the water administration budget? Okay.
All right, the next page is 8320, water source of supply, power, and pumping. And the only thing I would highlight here is a discussion that we can have on the heat, light, and power. I have a page in your in your packet that breaks down just all of those heat, light, and power lines. So what I would suggest is we wait until a full discussion on those. I think there might be some movement there, given some of the research that we've done.
If it would just make up its mind, it would be okay, right?
A good point.
Right.
Just real quick here, I noticed from 22, 23, and 24, $11,000 for the overtime line.
Yeah, I think we realize that there's an accounting mix up on that. They've been taking more out of the sewer than they have the waterfront, right, Angela? They didn't draw them down equally?
That is correct.
Because now everybody at the plant's 6 employees, everything comes out basically 50-50, draws down equally, but it's been heavy towards the other side right now.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else in this page?
And just real quick with the water testing as well.
Yeah, every so many years, we have to do different samples, so we usually leave it a little high. I think this year, we're going to start, the PFAS are going to start coming out again. So we have to test for those. So I think they're going to start getting more stringent on us.
Okay.
Okay, anything else from council? Okay, good.
The next page just goes over some of the wraparound costs for disability and health insurance. And then I would call your attention to page 58, it's Department 8340, water transportation and distribution. I don't have anything specific to point out to you here, but Shane, you might.
Yeah, I think line, is it 310 is up a little bit. It's got our hydrants. It's got the $50,000 for the dump truck. It's got the $25,000 for the replacement of the one we want to order this coming year. The 498, which has our drug testing in it, was up a little bit, but it's also got the fire system for DPW, a portion of it in there, and the brush pile. The only other thing I would say, we should probably talk about possibly capital construction in the future. We know we have an aging infrastructure, and we're not really putting a lot aside for it. I know we're trying.
No, that's okay.
Oh, we've got to-
Advocate, that's what we're here for. They have to
No,
hear
the
this.
175 that you're talking about in there, that's primarily talking about the plant, sort of with the wastewater treatment plant. We did the plant, but we didn't touch the collection system.
What do you need to do?
But for the sewer plant, we've got to separate. Right. The water plant, you have to at some point start thinking about at least start replacing blocks by blocks. I mean, some of it dates back to 1912 when the stuff was put in. Around kind of borrowed time.
Yeah, and I think that starts with doing some planning studies to know where we are.
So I was under the impression that was what we're looking at for a capital project at 25 million.
No, that's just to upgrade the plant.
It's just for the water plant.
That's just the water plant. Yeah, refurbishing the towers instead of putting rooms off. It talks about the intake line, which we did have clean first time, but that is in decent shape, but I don't think redundancy. Right now, when we drain the filters, it comes right back to the wastewater plant because of the way it's set up. So we're treating a few 100,000 gallons of water to send out back out. That's clean water. There's a way.
So we would need some further discussion about that at some point.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. Now that we got about it too.
What kind of construction would you be talking about here? Right? Just simple like entries or?
No, I'm a complete replacement. By street. I mean, we have trouble there, sort of like East Davis Street, right? We're trying to get a grant for that. That's overhaul that was up for close to $6 million. They want to do that. That's 3 blocks.
Yeah, these are large projects, probably a decade or more to go through. And it all starts with studies to figure out, where do we target first and prioritize? And that's both in the sewer side where you want to take your combines and make them separate. And then as Shane has said, on your water lines to make the upgrades that you need to have, considering they're in some places probably over 100 years old.
Then, the trouble there is like, we just looped in to bring Mill Street to River Street, because that new, they were having rust tops down there. And that new part cleared it up. Luckily, we had the money sitting in the account to do it, did it in-house. That's, in the future, we're gonna have to replace grid lines. I think that we can't, but someday we have to. Patching them together year after year isn't gonna make it.
Band-Aids only work for so long.
I'm not saying we have to, there's nothing immediately jumping out at us, but I think we need to plan to do something within the next 5 years or not.
Not the whole time.
No, I know, no. I mean, we couldn't even think about affording to do that, but maybe target certain blocks so we have a lot of breaks on, do a block here, a block there, and tie it back in.
You guys have the data.
Yeah, where our breaks are and stuff like that.
Right. Which we should start targeting. I wonder if we could do it at the same time we do switch up some of the combined sewer.
That would be the optimal time to do it, yeah. So if one street's tore up, just do both at the same time like they did with Patterson and Elizabeth. We did those two. In my opinion, water and wastewater is probably part of the city's future. The more we can invest, the more we can push out of the city into other areas.
Okay, so again, for future, some sort of presentation from management with regards to a longer term game plan about setting up I don't know how many year calendar to, just this section of the city next year and then this section of the year associated costs. Exactly.
So this line, this capital construction line, when you have a break, doesn't it come out of here?
No, it comes out of our materials and supplies line.
Okay. Gotcha.
That's where we pay parts, stone, blacktop, valves, yep. And I think if you don't go back, but there's the line back at the plant, pump supply and power, the line of 20,000, that's to replace some valves inside the plant right now because we can't wait any longer.
30,000 other contractual expense?
Is that the 498?
Yes, sir.
That's what I said. That's the
Okay.
drug testing,
Yep.
brush and
Okay.
fire system.
Yeah, I marked it, but I didn't say why.
Took me a while to figure that one out too.
Right, any other questions or comments on this page? Okay,
Next page is debt service. Not a lot of it in this fund, but obviously the liability is there in the future for whatever capital project we do here. And then the last page is the transfer to the general fund from this fund. There are certain employees who are paid out of the general fund who do provide services and effort into both the water and the sewer fund. We have revamped the formula to allocate these dollars to repay the general fund for that time. In this case, you can see the number there is $401,055. That also includes a repayment of the water fund's share for the Vector truck. If you recall, the general fund paid the vast majority of that out of CHIPS funds, and the general fund would need to be paid back. So we're going to do that in the water fund over the course of 3 years, and the sewer fund over the course of 5 years. So that's where that number comes in from.
The 401?
The 401, yep. And the 154 is money above and beyond that we're setting aside to put into fund balance to start building that up.
Okay.
And in terms of debt, this particular fund has it has about 4 years left on this particular bond. So for the next 4 years, that's approximately what your budgeted amount will be for 25, 6, 7, and 8.
okay, so any other comments or questions about the proposed water fund budget? Okay, again, thank you for the information.
All right, we'll move on to tab 6, which is the sewer fund. Fund highlights, again, it's a 4% increase in the preliminary budget. That translates, excuse me, to $22 a year for the flat rate. Since 2022, this fund's cost has increased by $1,450,000. That's a 56% increase. The flat rate has increased 22%. The vast majority of that increase, over $1 million of it, is the increase in debt service to pay for the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant. In 2025, we are projecting a $150,000 deficit in this fund that's made up and covered through an appropriated fund balance allocation. In 2023, the deficit in this fund was $600,000. We project in 2024 the deficit to be $760,000. And as I just mentioned, 2025, our projection is $150,000. This fund also has that missed over $50,000 in revenue, that the 2813 line that says appropriated fund balance, that should be thought of as release from reserves for the $50,000 for the dump truck.
So similar question as the one I asked in water fund. The fund balance budgeted for this year was $523,000. We're estimating a loss of $758,000.
That is correct.
And is there any specific reasons that is causing the variance there?
I'll defer to Angela on that.
Sure. One of the particular lines that we are over budget has to do with some engineering services that we're receiving. So we had a budget of 65,000, we're at 161. And that's the long-term control plan that is mandated, that's in there. So that was budgeted in 23, but it did not occur in 23, and that's a mandate that we have to do. The other impact to both water and sewer, I was going through it, is some of the health insurance with the employees has changed from where the budget was in. So that's another driver in some of the increases as well. And I would have to take a look at the metered sewer to see if we are going to hit budget on that, but that would be the other variance spot that I would draw your attention to.
I would say probably the prison again, and I think we might see a slight decrease again with the state hospital removing some of those buildings. I'm sure there's plenty of leaks in the water and sewer, so to our benefit, but not to our benefit, but wasting supplies.
So not now, it wouldn't be to our benefit.
No,
Right.
once they're, fixed, which is still good, we're not wasting the water, right? So that does one such the other.
Roughly, what are we spending on the issues that we're having now with our wastewater treatment plant? I mean, kind of on average, maybe. I mean, obviously it's not perfect, but
No, I think I talked Christian, maybe we spent $7,000 on new bugs. I think you mentioned it was like 6,000 something today in the conversation, some overtime, just to process the stuff.
and that's the date with all the issues that we're having.
I was just thinking about the last issue with the tanks turning
The
sour.
tanks and
But I don't think we really didn't have a lot into the issue. I mean, there really wasn't a lot we could do with it.
yeah, that's theirs, right? From
Yeah.
pretty much from
Yeah,
there
but
to
we
here.
did spend quite a bit more on chemicals to try to treat that, but they told us in a meeting earlier in the year they'll come good for it. We just gotta bill them out and,
And for council's information, the Development Authority has credited us with 1 month worth of professional fee to the tune, I think, $11,000.
yeah, we'll just $11,000.
For the trouble. So I think that will offset a lot of the expenditures.
That's good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for it, they offered it.
Nice.
It's also important for council.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I know they put a lot of time in with you guys from the Development Authority.
Yeah.
Late nights, all weekend long. Trying to make it right. I don't know if you've been down by there. I think it smells a lot better myself.
Yeah.
You stand over the tanks, you can't even.
Drove down 4th Street today just to see and smell it, but I wasn't sure which way the wind was blowing either. It's blowing from the south, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
No.
I mean, we are getting a little smell when we're dewatering, but that's gonna happen. We still gotta get the old,
Yeah.
rock sludge out. But it's, I'd say, my opinion is 90% better.
If the council is ready, we can go over to the fund balance projection. So we started in 2022 with just over $8 million total fund balance. 2022's operations yielded at $219,000 surplus. So that brings that fund balance at the end of 2022 to $3.2 million. 2023, it cost just under $600,000. That brings that fund balance number down to 2.6 million. You'll notice in 2023, you set aside the assigned fund balance amount. You'll see that $466,000 there. No longer is really usable. You can set that aside. That number is a little bit different than the number the mayor squared away with that is the revised budget number.
Okay,
Supposed to be
so,
adopted.
yeah.
But either way, it's going into 2024. We're also assuming another loss of $50,000 roughly, taking the fund balance down. This is the projection, right? It's not over yet. Just to $1.2 million. So you went and we started the sheet in the beginning of 2022 at $3 million. Now we're projecting to be about $1.9 million. So certainly the trend in the wrong direction for certain on that. Any questions on the first page before we close?
No, and I think part of that was the decision to not swipe the sewer rate where it should have been spiked, picking up that debt service, you know?
Yeah.
And,
That $1 million has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you had $50 million in fund balance, I might say, okay, that's a good place to get it from, but 3 million is not. These are big time pieces of equipment that will take down. It's not a $5,000 fix, they're 20, 30, 50, $100,000 fixes. So you have to have sufficient fund balance for those unanticipated items. So as we look into 2025, our projection is a deficit of $150,000. That's what we have appropriated in the fund balance. So that would bring the fund balance at the end of 2025 down to just over $1.7 million. Our plan moving forward in 2026 and 2027 is to incrementally increase rates to be able to cover the increases in costs and to start considering putting some money away, just like we want to do in the water fund for capital improvements. We have what I would consider a brand new plant, but that doesn't mean that things aren't going to break and you know, wear and tear, usage and those kinds of things. I think it's important to do that, and it's also important to make sure that we start building that fund balance up. I'm not sure what the right number is now for the sewer fund, because we don't have a benchmark like we do $25 million. And that's something as we're looking into our capital improvement plan, we'll have to come up with a number. But I can tell you that I am very much not comfortable with 1.6 or $1.7 million in fund balance there. But the first thing we need to do is stabilize this fund, just like the general fund, and get it into at least a zero balance, right? Maybe not a surplus, but certainly not a deficit. We've got to get out of deficit spending. That probably is job number one. And then we can start making those decisions. But as of right now, we are looking at that fund for 2025 will be at a deficit, albeit a much smaller deficit than the last couple of years.
Any questions or comments on the sewer fund balance projection?
As we look at tab 6, if you look at the budget printout, it starts on page 61 of 74, a few pages in. The first page is the revenue page. That incorporates an increase.
And Shane does bring up a good point in regards to this revenue. Line GG dash or 0.2121 is the metered sewer. We're anticipating the same amount of gallons in 25 that we were anticipating in 24, but with the demolition of those buildings, probably we may not hit that mark.
As we get more sophisticated in our budgeting, we'll probably bring in some of that information to be able to better project these revenue numbers and our expenditure numbers too. For first year into it, kind of throwing in, there are a lot of things I want to improve on from a process standpoint. That would be one of them.
Questions or comments on the revenue page? Okay.
Next page is 62, the general insurance. I won't be able to there's nothing to add. That's on the following page. So we'll look at page 64, Department 81 and sewer administration. Jane, if you have anything that you want to point out on this page?
The only thing in there is the capital equipment to replace that 1993 smaller dump truck. It was zero for the last several years. It's up to 25,000.
This department here is also showing the contingency built into the general fund, into the sewer fund account 590 of 44,975.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate you pointing that out. I wanted that number to be higher, but we got to fit it in. So just under $50,000.
It's almost a plug number, huh?
Well, so, 1,000, if you want to look at my Excel spreadsheet, minus this amount, minus this amount, minus this amount, and there we go. The nice round number of 44,975.
Okay, any questions or comments on the administrative page? Okay.
We can skip the next page, it's health insurance, and go right to Department 8120 sewer maintenance. That's page 6. Give the floor again to Shane.
The only thing I would point out is there's that 498 again, which includes the backflow preventer program for 10,000. The brush pile for 7,500, and then the fire system for 7,000. Then the 310 is the truck that was already ordered for 50,000.
Could you remind me again of the brush pile? What are we doing?
Chipping it and then pushing it over.
Okay.
Don't have no way to get rid of it anymore. Maybe biomass will come back into play someday, but right now it's not there. But it's, I don't know if anybody's been up there lately, but it's
Getting high.
it's covering probably half of it. Probably a couple of
That eventually turns into dirt, right?
Eventually, yes, it'll
Decompose.
So
roll.
Unrelated to the budget aspect, are we getting regulated by?
We don't expect it. So that's part of
They roll in, roll out.
Yeah, I think our letter this year was, we built out there with one plastic bag going around. But everything's separated, we can't.
Wasn't there some concern about the level of the height of some of these
Yes, I don't,
piles and
once we're, that's it.
so?
Once it's full, and I talked to her when it was earlier this year, I just don't want to get it wrong, but I think we could have a 1 acre landfill, maybe another spot where we can accept stuff. But if it gets too bad, then we can't accept anything from outside, whatever. If we cut it, the city itself, we can take it in, but we can't take anything from the owners now.
Right. Sorry, I asked.
Well, definitely something we need to put on our radar.
So the, you know, the Ready Project, all those stones down along the Little Park.
Yes.
And, you know, a lot of people have complained about that, including myself. It wasn't what I expected when we looked at the prints, and I think we're in agreement. But a lot of people, you know, I've talked to you about this before, about raising that whole level so we can cut it. If we don't, we're gonna get all sorts of, you know, box elder trees and everything else growing up in there. And it's an idea. I mean, I know it's not gonna solve our problem, but it could help a little bit, kind of like we did down by the port property, where we raised up the soil level using some of that, you know, decay from the old brush. And I think, I don't know if the Ready has been stamped off yet or not. I know that what's one of the things we have to wait for.
We're just finalizing what things over.
But we could certainly use that dirt to fill that in and make it something we can mow and people can actually have access to the water again and things like that. That I think that's a good place to keep our eye on using
Once it decomposes.
once it decomposes. I mean, unless we have some right now is what I'm saying too, or as soon as we're able to legally.
We don't have any top dirt to
Okay.
waste. I don't want to call it waste. I mean,
Right.
that's it. Put down there, it's not cheap.
I fear we'd run into some regulation state on
Yeah.
and because of the waterway and
Here's one of our,
some other issues. But I agree that it's an eyesore down there.
Came up with a good idea, so why not just once it starts, you see those things, or why not go down there with people? I never thought of it, you know?
Yeah.
Burn them off and then just have some there, you know, cold or a vacuum truck to straight down in case something happens. It's a pretty good way to control it, fast way to control it, right?
Yeah,
Instead of
right.
trying to weed it in, it's just a night,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it looks awful.
It needs to be filled in so we can just mow it, I think, sooner or later.
And I don't know if they'll let us, maybe they'll let us pour some concrete between them, you know, some small layer of concrete, which they say sometimes that's smooth, but break comes over and creates more problems. Sort of like they did on the outside of the wall.
It's just unfortunate that the public can't access it safely. Fish.
Yeah, we talked about trying to set of stairs in the middle of at least that one, to walk down. Sort of like stairs down to it, especially in Little Park.
Just something to keep in our minds, right? And,
What comes back so far.
right.
Anything else on sewer maintenance? Okay.
Next page is 8130 sewer treatment and disposal. And I will point out the line for 450 again, heat, light, and power. We can have that greater discussion. If the council wishes to make some changes, we can do it all at one time.
Okay.
And on this particular fund, right underneath heat, lights, and power, a couple lines, we have account 490 and 494. So on 494, we budgeted $150,000 of chemicals, but what we really are doing is we're splitting that out of line 490 so we can better track the chemicals. And it's important in this fund, especially given our IMA with Littleton.
Yeah, makes sense. Questions or comments?
The second page, just the wraparound benefit costs.
Yeah.
And we've got debt service, page 69. Slightly over $1 million for principal and $300,000.
This bond and this debt expires in 2052. So it's much different than the water fund.
Say pond or ban?
And on the last page, page 70, the transfer for other funds, similar to how I explained the water fund, transfer from the sewer fund to the general fund is covering two things. One is the cost of general fund employees for the work they do in the sewer fund, and then a 5-year payback on the Vector truck, or at least the sewer portion of that.
Okay, so any further discussion with regard to the proposed sewer fund budget? Okay, I hear nothing. So again, thank you, and thank you, Shane, very much.
Council, to help shape some of the discussion, I did put together a little package, page long. It's a fiscal year 2025 budget, budget topics identified. So I just put some little back in just to get the discussion going. The levy decrease in preliminary is $117,000 or 69 cents per thousand. We are appropriating fund balance of three operating funds, general fund $450,000. Nothing in the water fund, but $150,000 in the sewer fund. That means that we have more money in defensive going out than we do in those two funds coming in. And overall spending in the general fund is down $90,000 up the other two funds from compared to the 2024 budget. There were several new positions discussed and put into the preliminary. One was the deputy city clerk, which the entire management team said was priority number one. That is funded for an April 1st start. One police officer, I know they asked us two. And we'll talk a little bit about, I do have some information as to the out-year cost of adding an additional police officer that I think would be useful in the discussion. Also a new lieutenant position, a second lieutenant position for succession planning. That's funded in Q4 of 2025. The code enforcement officer, remember these budgets were put together in July to August. Since then we have I guess we'll call it a and we'll discuss just a little bit. It may not be appropriate to have a third code enforcement officer, but I do believe we need some capacity enhancements in that department. And then obviously an economic development specialist, which is partially funded from outside funding from the hospital. Both of those latter positions I talked about are in almost start as well. And item number 5 is just an analysis I did on heat, light, power, and that analysis on the third page.
Okay, so, and I'm sorry, can we double back to number 3? I'm not quite sure what that means.
The overall spending?
Yeah, so in general fund, the 91,000 reduction from adopted.
Yeah, so if you just take all of your spending, you can see that if you open up into tab 4, your packet. First page in that tab. You'll see 2024, it's page 8-13 on the bottom right-hand side.
Right.
You see 2024 budget 14,739, and then the preliminary budget 14,640.
All right, so it's a reduction from the adopted 2024
Yes.
budget. All right, I thought there was maybe some reference to, but we don't have an adopted budget yet for
Yeah,
25.
sorry, that's,
Okay,
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I should have been more specific.
okay,
My
okay,
mistake there.
understood. now.
Just to give you a little bit of, context of where we are from a spending standpoint. Obviously, the sewer funds decreased just about $100,000 over 2024 adopted. There's the cost of, sadly enough, the cost of doing business in these business type expenditures. The most important thing I want to point out is the fact that in 2 of our 3 operating funds, we're projecting deficits again for the water and the sewer. From the general fund standpoint, that means 2022 deficit, 23 deficit, projecting 24 deficit, and projecting the 2025 deficit as well. So that's 4 straight years of deficits. And sometimes deficits can be a good thing. In this case, in my opinion, the deficits are operational in nature. They are from recurring costs as opposed to one-time costs. And that's problematic for the long-term sustainability of our finances in the city.
Do refresh my memory on the lieutenant position.
Absolutely.
It funded to start in the fourth quarter. Or is that looking to replace the retirement, or are we looking to add the second lieutenant position permanently?
The answer is both, right? So once the one officer that is in the preliminary budget is up to speed, which will probably be around the quarter 4, we will, the plan is to promote a lieutenant. Both the chief and the lieutenant are both eligible for retirement within the next 18 months. So this becomes a succession planning position as much as it is an operational improvement.
So that's a second full-time position. It's not just one quarter. And going into 2026, it's going to be full-time. Okay.
Exactly. And then we'll see, depending in 2026, what the retirement situation looks like and what our financial position is. The chief would argue that he should have 2 lieutenants for operational success. I think we'll have to see in 2026 what the city can afford to do from an operational standpoint, whether we take and go back down to the 1 lieutenant, the current structure, to afford a second lieutenant.
I agree with the chief, but you're right that finances are going to determine what we can do with all of our departments.
So one thing that, first of all, I think you've done a great job on the budget. I'm very confident in your budget. The only thing I still want to see is I'd like to see 1 more police officer. And I think when it comes to code enforcement, we should probably worry about getting 2 for this year and keeping 2 if we can. I mean, obviously we're going to lose 1, but who knows when we're going to hire 1. So I'm not sure how that balances out. I know the chief always says for a new officer, it's about 90 grand, hold on, health insurance, salary, the whole 9 yards. And so, and I think you just told us that you've done a little work on it.
Yeah.
Well, if I could just, I'd like to hold off on those discussions. We'll go all the way through this presentation.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I didn't think we were going to discuss the salaries. But that's
Yeah, I think we are at the new position. I can't stress enough how important I think it is to hire a deputy city clerk.
absolutely.
401 start may not be, we may need to start sooner than that. But that's what we have to budget right now. And if we are going to start sooner, we'll have to find the money somewhere else. But that's the plan right now. I want to skip over the two police positions for now and answer your question about code enforcement. When I proposed the third code enforcement officer, that was a succession plan. No, but not knowing for sure, but, you know, having that feeling that we were probably going to have a resignation in that office. So we thought we would bring a third person on. I do believe we need additional capacity in that office, though. I would say that other than the wastewater, that is the department where I think the most citizen concerns and complaints from. I demoed a very, very cool technology where they mount cameras onto city vehicles. Those vehicles drive around and they take pictures of all the buildings that pass by. And using artificial intelligence, they're able to identify code violations. And that to me could be a game changer from a productivity standpoint. It's relatively reasonable, $34,000 for one camera. I haven't demoed it with the department heads yet, so Shane's just hearing about this for the first time. Sorry, Shane. We will demo it with both code folks and with our department heads, just to see if there's any cross functionality and to get management's full opinion on that. So what I would say is we may not need the whole allocation for salary for a code enforcement officer, but I would urge council to consider leaving that money or a good portion of that money into the contingency account in case this is something that we want to move forward on. I think the benefits and the efficiencies would be incredible. It would free up our code enforcement officers to be able to do some of the other things that we probably want them to be doing. And really adds to our accountability. And although the AI does not function and coordinate with our case management software, that is something that they're working on doing for Q1 of 2025. So it would become almost seamless at a point in time between our case management system and the way it works is, as you said, the cameras go around, they take pictures, and AI processes it. So they'll do it on day one, and by the next morning, the results are in. So it takes overnight to kind of process what the pictures, what the computer is seeing. It was extremely impressive, and I think there's more research to be done, but it moves us in the right direction. Certainly, paying for that is significantly less expensive than adding a third code enforcement officer when you wrap around that cost and things going on. So I wanted to skip over that and talk about that just to make you. We're in the works on this. We're not ready to pull the trigger yet by any stretch of the imagination. But capacity in that office through this or some type of technology might be worthy of further review and discussion.
Yeah, I think I'd like to know more about it. I'm envisioning the pitchforks and the torches right now, because you drive around the city and the entire city is a code violation almost, and it's so depending upon how you can set that, and I don't disagree with the efficiency part of it, but I worry.
Yeah, I get the idea that what came to my mind was over Big Brother is watching. But the point of the matter is, it's not going to take anything that you can't see from the right of way as a code enforcement officer, right? And our expectation of a code enforcement officer would be if they drive by something and they see something that's not code, that they would be dealing with that. What this does allow you to do, yes, it's going to see it's going to get a lot of data and a lot of violations, but we would be able to prioritize that and say, okay, here are the things that we feel are the biggest bang for our buck. Maybe we call it low-hanging fruit, whatever you want to utilize. But it also will allow council to be able to weigh in on what council feels are the most important issues that we need to deal with. It actually is what it is. And what you will end up doing, what I saw was a map of the city and it's color coded. So if there's a section of the city that is significantly blighted, you'll see that in red. And then it'll go out to the yellow and shit. You don't see anything that means it's not in good shape. Right. So we target by area to say, okay, we need to spend more time here. We can also get lists of different violations. We can group violations so we know, hey, it escaped, but, you know, maybe there's a lot of brush problems, right? People don't see that. Maybe it's, you know, garbage on the one. Or maybe it's, you know, bad roof or, you know, whatever. We'll be able to know. Right now, we don't know what we know. At least if we know what our challenges are and where our major stumbling blocks are, we, council, along with management, very much could begin to prioritize how we attack those problems. Good. But I hear what you're saying.
Go ahead. It could go for us or against us, but I think you're right. Prioritize and really establish a system, which is gonna take a little while, you know, but,
And there's no guarantee that we'll get to these things faster. Although I do think there's going to be some technology that's there that makes us more efficient. But what it does do is it really gives us a picture of what our problems, you know, is it all about, you know, paint siding, is it roof, is it, you know, cars without license plates in the fire, you know, whatever it happens to be, we'll know what that is, and we can develop strategy. It doesn't mean we go fine. But it does mean that we will work with the traffic to get things away and fixed as quickly as we can. Because the improvement to a property owner who's doing the right things next to someone who doesn't could mean anything between an assessment increase of 5 to 10%. That helps us lower our rate for everybody.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I would encourage council to consider leaving those funds in contingency so that we have something. You almost don't need to make decisions tonight on any of this stuff because the money is allocated in contingency. So we can almost wait a little while we develop some of these other thoughts. Because we are delivering a modest, but it's a lot of features. So we will say that. So that was my point I was going to make on the code enforcement officer. I do want to address, I did a little over here on adding a second police officer. So if you turn to the second page of that little package, what I did was I made a copy of the appendix page, which are the salaries for our officers for the entire length of the contract. As you see, the contract ends in 2026. And when Angela and I were trying to squeeze in a second police officer, we probably could have done the math for 2025, probably would have sacrificed something else in the budget. But what we looked at was the cost of hiring an officer to year 3 is a 33% increase, right? So it's not just, okay, we've got to cover the salary for this year and then maybe a 2% or 3% in the next few years. Because of the step increases, you have a very large increase. And I just think that's something to wrestle with and consider if you make a decision to add a second police officer, that you're adding significant dollars. And my recommendation, and I think Angela would agree, was hiring an additional police officer for 2025 and then staggering it with another police officer if funds allow in 2026 helps to spread that large increase. So if you look at what's listed as cost analysis on the bottom, and there's some highlighted. The reason why the columns are highlighted is the contract expires in 2026. So what I did was I took a modest salary increase on each one of these salary steps of just 3%. So basically, theoretically extending the contract for years. So we hired somebody in 2025. For 6 months, we're going to pay them $47,000. The next year, that salary jumps up to $58,000. The year after that, it jumps up to $62,700. And if you just look at the bottom box there, your higher rate in year 1 is 22%, or almost $11,000. From your year 1 to year 3 is another $5,000. And total from higher rate to year 3 is roughly a 33% increase in salary. And I know you can't put a price tag on public safety, but unfortunately, we have very limited funds. Plus, I wanted to squeeze a second officer in the budget. I didn't know how we were going to be able to come up with $16,000, $17,000 over the the next couple of years times 2. So that's the issue. It's not, we can cut, we can squeeze, we can manipulate the numbers to manipulate our cop. But it's paying for it in the out years. It is the difficulty. And I just don't know what sales tax is going to do in 2026 or 2027. If we knew that we were going to have, 7, 8, 10% increases, I'd say, I know we're going to. But we're going to have union increases. We have a fire contract up at the end of next year, 2 PVA contracts the following year. Those are not going to be probably decreases in the cost of our personnel. It's probably going to be increases. And $16,000 or $16,000 times 2 over the course of a couple of years can be a budget buster for us when you think about all the other costs and all the other increases. And also, I would remind council that we were very lucky this year with our health insurance increase at 1.1%. I can almost guarantee 99.9% certainty that we will not have a 1.1% increase in our healthcare costs next year. We'll probably be closer to 8 to 10%. And that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're not paying this year that we'll have to pay next year. And if we're going to continue the trend of lowering the levy by $117,000 a year for the next 5 years, the upward pressures on health insurance, on the retirement system, which will continue most likely to deliver increases in the $100,000 to $200,000 range year over year. I'm just not sure how we pay for it. I told the chief, I said, Chief, I wanted to get you 2. I can only do 1, and my commitment is to try and squeeze 1 in for 2026. I think there's a lot of headwinds against doing that, but council says that's what we're doing. My recommendation is be what you will be able to do, but if council wants to add it in 2025, we'll figure it out.
Any reaction from council?
Fund, I work with our police officers pretty regularly in the middle of the night in all kinds of situations. I'd desperately love to see the second officer, but I just can't agree, the finances we're in right now, that adding 1 at least is a start. And I just can't see the funding coming from anywhere to add a second one. As much as I'd like to, I can't support that.
If I could just interject just another perspective regarding the consideration of adding a new police officer. I just want council to consider that within our budget in 2025, there's $576,000 of revenue that's covering the cost of 5 police officers. This revenue is coming from the Ogdensburg Central School District on a 3-year agreement. And it's also, it's almost half-half, but some money is coming and budgeted from the Ogdensburg Bridge and Port Authority for the airport security coverage as well. We know from the past that the OBPA has gone to legislation for peace officers. So there's a risk on that amount of money. That line alone was a $306,000 budgeted item. It does have overtime built in there, so the base contract amount with OBPA is $240,000. It's important to understand the intentions of both of these agencies going forward, because this is a significant amount of officers that is funded by outside money.
That's an excellent point. I'm glad you made it because I forgot to make it. In effect, what we're doing is we're paying for recurring costs with one-time money, which is these contracts. If the contracts expire, they choose not to renew them, or they choose just to take their 90-day out. So, in effect, that's a risk in doing these things. And although these positions are supposed to be dedicated to those operations at OBPA or the school, what we're doing on the downtime of those officers, we're having them fill in operational shifts as opposed to augmenting service, right? Having an extra person, they're actually filling an operational shift. So this is one of those departments where we're going to have to financially work through the challenges of when we're taking operational officers and paying for it with outside revenues. That's an excellent point. Thank you for making it.
Did the legislature pass that peace officer bill again this year?
I don't know.
I don't believe they did.
They did.
And the reason I say that is because, well, multiple reasons really. One, any trained peace officer is not going to be blessed by the agency, whether it be the Office of Mental Health and or Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. They're not going to put their training on the liability of an issue in a federal airport. And secondly, the peace officers have no ability to be able to house an incident of that. I'm not sure whether or not that legislation passed this year. I don't believe it did. I'm going to find out here shortly, but ultimately at the end of the day, I don't foresee that ever coming. Which is good for us. Right? But it doesn't fix it doesn't add a police officer. It's not my point. I'm just making that point.
No, that department's not structured. It's a challenge throughout the budget, but in that department, it's pretty structured.
Right, anyone else on council wants to offer a comment on this?
Yeah, give me a minute here. I concur with Dan Fonda. This a very good presentation in every aspect, in every department that we've gone through. This outlines it better than any budget proposals that I've had in my tenure as a city councilman. Recognizing the code enforcement aspect of another officer and in the recent resignation, I understand the position there. But we also, on top of that, we've got an antique code that's going to need to be revamped significantly, right? And so I can now also see potential and the need there. And I also recognize letter E, as far as a police officer. We've got, economic development is going to be paramount to this city eventually at some point. I would also like to see another police officer, just based off of, my support for them that I've always had, but more importantly for the safety of our citizens in the city of Ogdensburg. It's a very pared down budget. I like the fact that we're putting money aside for capital improvement projects and the whole 9 yards, but in some way, I wonder if the economic development specialist can be put off for a potential year.
It certainly can be. That will be $37,500.
That's it. Right?
That's it. And the only thing I would say is that any savings you're looking to generate or any monies that you're looking to shift, remember, you're still projected to spend $450,000 per year.
I know.
And I think job number one from a fiscal standpoint is getting that to zero as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you can, if you were to add the police officer, safety concern, what you're doing is the decision in reality in what I call herd language is we're basically continuing to pay what we're hurting costs for one time, right? We're somewhere along the road, we're grabbing fund balance that we can only spend once to cover operational costs that happen year over year. And until we get into a structural balance situation, my recommendation is let's go with the one cop and not the two cops. But council is I will respect the decision.
Understood. But another aspect here, in relation to succession in the police department as well, we're bringing in a potential second lieutenant, which I'm in favor of, and the potential for losing the chief, in 15, 16 months. Another lieutenant potentially. I don't know what the average amount of years our police officers have. I know it's 20 and out for retirement. And then in the climate that's been produced in the last couple of years, the burnout rate is high. And, and that's another cause for recruitment.
Along those lines, Mike, when I was on previous council around 2011, our police force was so young, we didn't have enough people to fill a supervisor role. They didn't have enough time in to be a supervisor at night. So we must have an awful lot of officers that are getting close to retirement time. That's been 14 years, 13 years. So it's something we need to think about, a succession, but I don't know.
We just had a sergeant retire, and this past Friday, we had a new sergeant, so.
That's right, congratulations.
Yeah, that position was covered. I think as the chief tells me, the average in service for a police officer right now is somewhere between 5 to 6 years. I got that right. So it's not the most experienced crew, but from an average standpoint, they do have some time on the streets.
And they're learning quickly, I'm sure.
I think that's a true statement.
And again, we've got a pretty good bunch of folks. So.
Yeah.
We have
Anything else?
5 officers currently whose hire date was in the 2006-2007 range. And then there's one that was hired in 2010. So they're at that 14-year mark. Then they go up from there. So we've got some 11s, some 12s, 16s, 17s, 20s, and 23s, 4s. So, outside of those 5, they're probably at that 12-year mark, I would say.
Thank you, Angel.
Mhm.
Right, Mike, what's up?
Yes, sir.
All right. Other comments from council?
The only other potential thing that I see is that you could cut the amount of decrease in our tax levy and thing, but then we're dealing with our constitutional tax limit thing that we're trying to get away from. That's the only place I see where we could realistically come up with those funds. And if we're trying to deal with a constitutional tax limit, that doesn't make sense.
That's the number right there.
Yeah.
So that's the discussion on kind of the new positions and just putting some information together for council to chew on and think about and maybe for additional conversation. I don't know if it's council's purview to continue talking about the new positions or.
Well, I just want to see if there's any comments from other council.
Okay, well, my concern is if we wait on hiring another 2 officers with a retirement rate and with people, can we wait that long? You know what I mean, without a burnout situation and we lose someone again before we can get someone in?
Well, right now we're short 4 officers, so I don't even get any worse than this right this second. 80 people or so did take the police officers exam, so we hired 5 off of that list, given the current preliminary budget, perhaps as many as 6 if that's council's wish. It will take 9 months to get them through the academy and on-the-job training. My point in saying all that is our staffing should be significantly better this time next year than it is today. More easily able to absorb a retirement at this moment in time. Now that assumes that we're able to hire, that assumes that everyone gets through the academy, gets through on-the-job training. It's a official officer that can go out and do work. That's a lot of ifs. But I have confidence in the chief that he'll find the right people, hire them, get them trained up. So I can't anticipate your question. All I can answer to your question is I believe we'll be in better shape to absorb a retirement if one were to happen next year with the 5 or 6 new hires than we are at this moment. We're as lean and mean as we can possibly be. And this is what we're asking.
Okay, what's that, Mike? Okay, anybody else? Okay, I mean, I would just offer my comments that I agree with the rationale in staying with what's been proposed in the budget with the hire of one officer for this year. And, again, the long-term goals as presented to council by the city manager, the reduction of the tax levy over 5 years to try to achieve an 80% of constitutional tax limit and getting to a true balanced budget without use of fund balance. And again, as those years proceed, there may be other, issues that come up that may impact, the timing of achieving those goals. 5 years, I think, is aggressive. Okay. In light of maintaining level of services and then, increasing staffing when we can to provide additional services or support for our staff. So in that regard, then I'd like to stay true to the first year of the 5-year plan in regards to the proposed tax levy decrease and the use of $450,000 fund balance. And I don't see an opportunity that's worthwhile in moving monies to another area of the budget to cover an additional officer. So those are my thoughts. Okay, so we move on now to the heat, water, or heat, light, and power.
So I would turn your attention to the third page. What I did was I pulled the history of all of the lines that have heat, light, and power, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's 8 budget lines in the general fund, 3 different departments over there. And then there's 1 line in water, 1 line in sewer. I put those at the bottom, and I think they're kind of bolded, so they pop out a little bit for you. And so you can see all the history for those lines, as well as the 2025 preliminary budget numbers there. The second chart is the same lines, the same different departments, broken down by the 3 operating funds that you can see there. With the preliminary budget in the first column there are numbers, and then the trend for 2024. Again, when we put this budget together, it was probably working off of June's data, right? And we have more data now. And I think some of these electric lines might be a little heavy. They're based off of a previous year where the kilowatt hour rate went from 5 cents to 8 cents. And because of that, what it appears to me, and I think, Angela, you can chime in because we've had this conversation, we dug into this pretty good. Initial increases were made based on the kilowatt hour going up by 3 cents an hour. 3 cents an hour. And then some of those increases were maybe higher than they should have been. And so this year's estimates were based off of previous budget. So I do think there's a little bit of room there. So what I did was I put the preliminary number of what is in the budget right now. This is, I'm looking at the second chart. The next column, as I said, was the 2024 trend, right? So this year, basically we had 9 months worth of data, divide the number by 9, multiply by 12, and that gives you kind of the trend. And then we took the trend and made it 3%, 5%, 7% to it. Our kilowatt hour is going to stay pretty flat. We have a 2-year contract, but usage may or may not be the same depending on, especially if you look at the wastewater treatment plant. We're using more electricity now than we were in previous years. We're using ultraviolet instead of chemicals to do that final stage of making the water right, whatever phrase that is. Yeah, not actually. Thank you. That's it. And so if we, in the final column of that second chart is a possible change that I would feel comfortable bringing those lines down to. And if you look at the general fund, the total of that is about $50,000 in savings. We could probably do $32,000 in the water fund and $20,000 in the sewer fund. And I know what you're thinking, hey, there's how it's but I would always point out the fact that we are $450,000 in the band appropriated fund balance in the general fund. And as a very conservative budgeter as I am, I would say you take that $50,000 and put it against the appropriated fund balance and lower it $450,000, $400,000. In the water fund, that $32,000 should probably go either into the contingency account for unforeseen circumstances or additional dollars to build up the fund balance for our debt service. In the sewer fund, it's only $20,000. I would just say. But the other option in the sewer fund would be to take the appropriated fund balance from $150,000 down to $130,000. I can't stress enough how important it is from my standpoint as kind of your fiscal guy, right? The guy who's kind of giving me the advice. We've got to get to a point where we're not running deficits. It's killing the fund balance. And at some point in time, you're not going to have it to rely on. So yes, I think we can get some savings out of this budget, these lines. And as much as it kills me to say, I think you can still afford a cop because of the deficit spending.
I think it's a detrimental year. I think we need to get on our feet, see how the trend goes. All the points that were made tonight are valid and sound, you know. I agree. As much as I want to see the other police officer.
As do I.
In regards to the general fund savings, how tight are you in the potential use of the entire contingency line where you might consider adding the 50,000 to the contingency line versus reduction of fund balance?
We have $50,000 in unallocated contingency line. So.
And are you comfortable? Would your preference be to reduce the fund balance from 450 to 400 versus adding this to contingency?
To me, it's 6 of one, half of the other. I would probably tell you contingency just as I don't think 50,000 is enough. That large, $14 million, I think will eat up that contingency pretty quick. But if you were to take it off of appropriated fund balance, in the end, you're still going to still have to take it out of fund balance.
Yes.
So contingency or inappropriated fund balance, whatever the number is, the number ends up being. So I don't think it matters one way or the other. If I had a preference, I think it's better operationally to put it. I know it's a long-winded answer, but these are somewhat complicated issues.
Well, that way it's back up and when we do next year's budget, we can figure out what we're going to take for a fund balance appropriation then, correct?
Well, the worst thing that happens is that you put it in contingency, you don't spend it, and in the end, it does reduce your deficit.
Right.
You just do it on the
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
Sonda, going back to the lighting, what's included in the parks? Is that strictly the street lights in the park, or is it like the Dubisky Center included in that, or is that in the buildings?
I'll pump that to the experts.
I don't know where the buildings are, but I'm assuming it's probably part of the new streetlight center through Greenville, but.
I'm assuming the new lights are fairly energy efficient, but
Yes.
there's an awful lot of them, but that would include like the Maple City Trail and the lights downtown in the park and stuff like that. And the Dubisky Center is probably under buildings.
I would guess what I would say, yeah, there's a few lights on our.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not recommending we turn those lights off or anything. I was just curious as to what was included in that line.
A little bit of spike, a lot more of those.
It's not included in street, those are not included in street lighting. That's a separate category. So, okay.
So would council be comfortable then with the shown savings in each of the three funds if the heat, light, and power budgets are reduced as suggested, and those savings be added to the contingency expense line in each of the three budgets? Is everyone
The
comfortable
way
with
I
that?
think we ought to go, yes.
Okay, so we'll make that change, and then we,
And then if they go over, the money's still there, right?
Yeah.
So,
It just offset your deficit. I can't say we have great operations and that's your surplus. Right. Don't anticipate that for next year.
okay. Any other thoughts at this time about any other possible revision to the proposed budget that's been accepted by council for 2025.
I just want to reiterate what Dan said. I think this is a great effort by Fonda, and what Councilor Powers said, that the best budget presentation I've seen, well, in my other previous term, what I've witnessed the last 2 or 3 years as a member of the public. So thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
I support it pretty much as written.
That's very kind of you. I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of people help me. I want to make sure that they get the kudos they deserve.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate the time and effort put in by the department heads and working with you for many, many weeks in putting together the budget presentations that you have provided us. And just echoing the other comments, the presentation, the style of presentation has just been outstanding from my perspective. So again, thank you and your team. The only other comment I would make, this isn't a revision, but we had the request at the last workshop from Shane and Andrea about $12,500 possible need for contracted services. That when I talked to Fonda about that rather than change the budget, we'll find a way, we'll record the expense as expended and then make budget transfers as needed. So I think that's a good way to proceed with that one request. Okay, so any other comments or discussion with regards to the proposed 2025 budget? Okay, so at our meeting next Tuesday, November 12th, we'll have the public hearing, and then there'll be a resolution on the floor to adopt a budget that will have the one revision, at least the one revision we talked about tonight about the reduction of the heat, light, and power expense, adding to contingency. And at that time, if between now and then, if anybody else has a thought about a possible change, or Councilor Stevenson, who unfortunately couldn't join us tonight, has some suggestions, we would still have time to deal with that. So, but these workshops have been very productive.
Mhm.